Friedrich Nietzsche and the rise of new religions. In the latter part of the 19th century, when Nietzsche proclaimed that God is dead, he believed that future generations would suffer immeasurably from God's premature funeral. Why? Because without such a God, without such an ultimate meaning or concern, humans would have to stare reality in the face and discover that there was no ultimate purpose to human existence. Humans are the expendable result of blind evolutionary processes and, as such, have no ontological status in the grand scheme of things. As Nietzsche argued, without God, we are left with nihilism, which is another way of saying that without ultimate meaning, we are left with no meaning at all. Hence, when humans kill their belief in God, they must then turn to their own inner selves and, in so doing, discover that there is no truly objective truth by which to govern their lives. We become wanderers, a lost species. Yet, though Nietzsche was prophetic for his time, God has died more or less in the secular world, he did not realize how resilient belief in God would be. We now live in a scientific age, where it is difficult for us to believe as our ancestors before us did. But as Mircea Eliade so rightly pointed out, sacred feeling, the sense of the numinous, is not a stage in human development, but an integral element of one's very psychophysical makeup. Even if we kill one God, another will rise up to replace him or her. We are religious beings to the core, even in our strident atheism. Hence, Nietzsche's prophecy is not about killing our spiritual sensibilities. Those are forever with us, barring some future DNA tinkering, but rather about the decay of a certain cultural icon, the uplifted totem of our Western society. And according to Nietzsche, we as a society were not ready for it. We were pretending to be adults and mature scientists, when, in point of fact, we were merely schoolchildren playing too early with our chemistry sets. We were not ready for the explosion. We were not ready for the Nietzschean existential hammer. We were not ready, in sum, to kill meaning and face the consequences. But, ironically, Nietzsche was wrong about God's death. Indeed, we killed a certain form of God, the mythic and naive belief we carried over from primitive times, but we did not, perhaps cannot, kill God. God, as an ever-resilient idea, resurrects. God does not die per se, but only certain versions of him, her, it do. Thus, the history of religion is not about God's fast retreat from the day-to-day affairs of the world in the wake of humans' continual progress, but rather about how varying versions of God arise and decay over time. Likewise, religion does not die out when humans progress scientifically. Instead, it adapts itself to the new cultural milieu. Religion is not an outside force penetrating into the heart of humans, but instead part and parcel of the neurological history of humans, and thus is intimately connected with our own psychological projections. To destroy religion, we would have to destroy who we are. Therefore, God persists in various manifestations, and religion persists, despite protestations to the contrary, since they arise from our biological heritage. The real question, then, is not about why humans are religious, but how human spiritual yearning projects itself differently over historical time and geographical space. A classic example to illustrate the resilience of religion and its evolutionary nature occurred in the Roman Catholic Church. In the 15th century, most leaders of the Roman Catholic Church still believed that the sun revolved around the earth. Those who thought otherwise were severely reprimanded, put in jail, tortured, or worse yet, executed. At this time, devout Christians felt that their sacred book, the Bible, indicated that the earth was the center of the universe. If astronomers, like Galileo and Copernicus, showed evidence to the contrary, it would mean that the Bible was wrong. And if the Bible was wrong, it would mean that God was wrong. And if God was wrong, well, he was no longer God. Such a thought was impossible in light of church teachings. Hence, to question the Bible's astronomical version of cosmology was akin to questioning God's supreme authority and knowledge. It is little wonder, therefore, that the radical thinker Giordano Bruno, who posited a theory of multiple universes, was burned at the stake. Better for a false believer to die than to have millions of faithful Christians have their belief in God shattered. 5 centuries later, however, Pope John Paul II essentially apologized in 1992 for the Church's blunder and its maltreatment of intellectual pioneers. This same Pope, by the way, acknowledged the irrefutable evidence of evolution. Despite the fact that the Catholic Church allowed its concept of God to slowly evolve, it nevertheless disconnected itself from growing schisms in its ranks, both from the liberal and conservative wings. Where did such members now turn, if not towards the Catholic Church? New religions? Even if those new religions were merely genealogical extensions or offshoots from more mainstream faiths. Thus, it is not surprising to see the protest movement turning both liberal and conservative. Liberal in the direction of science and deism, and conservative in the direction of biblical fundamentalism and its unimpeachable authority. These twin responses led to new movements, new faiths, and new interpretations. Hence, in one significant aspect, the evolution of human conceptions of God is the impetus behind the evolution of new religions, which attempt to cope with any church's attempt to integrate or denigrate its faith with humanity's new or old discoveries of the world around them. This is what Nietzsche meant when he said that we have killed God, the Jewish Christian version, prematurely in the latter part of the 19th century. At God's funeral, there will be a banquet where other gods will vie for the newly bereft followers. Nietzsche feared that only the god of nihilism would be the winner. How could humans muster up the strength or the naivete to believe in anything else? Yet Nietzsche was only partially correct. Nihilism vis-à-vis existentialism vis-à-vis postmodernism certainly does have its assemblage. Since even dead gods can be resurrected in newly disguised forms, some of which are better adapted to the mode of the time. Thus, cultural decay can indeed lead to new religious movements. A close analysis of the etymology of the word culture is revealing. Its root is cultus. Culture is another way of saying established cult, or an established way of thinking, living, and being. Any time a culture is severely questioned, usually epitomized by a questioning of its most cherished gods or values, by a significant portion of its population, it leads to new cults of thought. Culture does not so much disappear as change. Religions do not so much decay as much as evolve. God's decay, then, does not lead to his or her demise, but to the opposite, his or her resurrection in a new version or form. Nietzsche realized that Europe's God was on a death march, and in its steps a much more terrifying God would emerge, that of nihilism, no meaning, and no purpose. Such a God did arise and walk, but so did countless others, which contravened the philosophy of existentialism. Such cults are society's responses to change. The death of one religion leads to the birth of a new one, even if that offspring arises within the midst of its parent. From Judaism, we get Christianity. From Catholicism, we get Lutheranism. From Hinduism, we get Buddhism. From Buddhism, we get Zen. From the medieval Indian tradition of Nirguna Bhakti poets, collectively known as Sant Mat, we get Radhaswami. From Radhaswami, we get Ekankar, and so on. Each emerges, then rejects, then branches separately apart from the parental source. The god of an earth-centered cosmology dies only to reappear as a bigger god of a sun-centered cosmology, only to die again and re-emerge as the progenitor of the Big Bang and multiple universes. God's adaptations are innumerable because human desire for ultimate meaning is, given the present state, insatiable. But why do some religions become more popular than others? Why do some new religions fulfill the needs of a larger segment of the population, where other religions struggle and die out? To answer that question, the next section we need to turn from Nietzsche, who laid the groundwork for why and how gods and religions decay and arise, to the mimetic theory of cultural evolution, particularly as Richard Dawkins and Susan Blackmore present it. This is because ideas are like genes, and they need to reproduce in order to survive and be passed on to a new generation. In the following sections, we will focus on 5 new religions and how certain mimetic ideas became operative in the spread and eventual acceptance of their respective teachings.